I unjammed my husband's printer and watched his entire double life fall out of the tray. I was holding a crumpled piece of paper in one hand and a red Sharpie in the other when I realized my marriage wasn't just over, it had never been what I thought it was. Let me back up, but not too far, because the part that matters, the part that changed everything, started at 11:47 on a Friday morning with a printer that supposedly didn't work. My name is Ashlyn. I'm 31 years old. I have a rescue dog named Biscuit who sleeps at the foot of our bed, and up until approximately 48 hours ago, I thought I had a pretty decent life. Not perfect. Nobody's life is perfect, but decent, solid, the kind of life you'd describe to someone at a dinner party without flinching. My husband, Marcus, and yes, I'm using his real name, because at this point, privacy is a courtesy I no longer feel obligated to extend, is 34. He's a senior account manager at a mid-sized financial firm downtown. He wears nice shoes. He remembers to water the plants when I travel for work. He makes a genuinely great Sunday morning omelette. I thought those things added up to something. I thought those things meant I knew him. I didn't know him at all. Marcus works from home on Fridays. That's been the arrangement for almost 2 years now, ever since the company went to a hybrid model and he lobbied hard for his Friday remote day. He always framed it as a productivity thing. I get more done at home without the office noise, he'd say, setting up his little station in our second bedroom turned office, dual monitors, a standing desk he uses approximately never, and a wireless printer that cost more than my first car payment. That printer, God, that printer. I was in the kitchen when he started cursing at it. I remember because I was on the phone with my mother, half listening to her talk about her neighbor's fence dispute, and I kept hearing these low, frustrated grunts coming from down the hallway. Then a louder, sharper, "Are you kidding me right now?" I covered the phone and called out, "Everything okay?" "Printer's jammed," he said, and his voice had that tight, controlled quality he gets when he's trying not to lose it completely. "It's completely broken. I've been trying to print something for 20 minutes and it keeps jamming. I'm just going to deal with it later." I told my mom I'd call her back and wandered to the office doorway. Marcus was already shutting down his laptop, pulling on his jacket. He looked stressed, but then, Marcus always looks at least slightly stressed on Fridays. I'd stopped reading too much into it. "You're leaving?" I asked. "I thought you were working from home today. I have that business lunch, remember? The Callaway account." He straightened his collar in the little mirror by the door without quite meeting my eyes. "I told you about it last week." He hadn't told me about it last week. I am almost certain of this, but I'd gotten used to filling in the gaps with charitable assumptions. Oh, maybe I forgot. Maybe I zoned out. Maybe he mentioned it when I was half asleep. That is what 6 years of marriage does to you. It trains you to extend the benefit of the doubt like a reflex. "Okay," I said. "What time will you be back?" "Not sure. These things always run long. Don't wait up for dinner." He kissed me on the cheek, that quick, distracted, absent kiss that had replaced the real one so gradually I hadn't even noticed the transition, and then he was gone. I heard the garage door rumble open and shut. I heard his car back out of the driveway. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, doing nothing. Biscuit padded over and pressed his warm, solid head against my shin, and I reached down and scratched his ears, and that was that. I forgot about Marcus and the printer for the next 2 hours. I had my own work to deal with. I'm a freelance graphic designer, which means my office is the dining room table and my commute is 12 steps in socks, and I had a client revision due by 3 o'clock. I put on a playlist, made a second cup of coffee, and got into it. The morning moved. The revision got done. I sent it off at 2:18 and leaned back in my chair with the specific, uncomplicated satisfaction of a completed task. That's when I remembered the return label. I'd bought a pair of boots online 3 weeks ago. They were the wrong size, my fault entirely. I'd ordered too fast, and I'd been procrastinating on the return because it required printing a prepaid shipping label, and our printer had been acting up. That's what Marcus called it whenever I asked. "The printer's acting up. I'll look at it this weekend." And then the weekend would come and go and the printer remained unlooked at and the boots remained in their box on the closet floor. But now it was just me and the printer and a Friday afternoon with nowhere to be. I figured I'd give it a shot. I pulled up the return label on my laptop, sent it to print, and walked down the hall to the office. The printer sat on its little shelf, dark and silent. I checked the display panel. It was showing an error icon, a tiny graphic of a paper sheet with a lightning bolt through it. Paper jam. I pressed the menu button, navigated to the jam clearing instructions the way you do when you've watched your husband curse at a machine enough times to learn its interface by osmosis, and opened the rear access panel. There it was. A single piece of paper, crumpled and accordion folded, wedged deep into the back roller mechanism. I reached in, got 2 fingers around it, and pulled, slowly, carefully, the way you'd remove a splinter, until it came free with a dry, papery tear at one corner. I barely glanced at it. It was just a jammed piece of paper. I set it on the desk, pressed the clear button, and listened to the printer wake up. That's when it started. The machine word. It clicked. It made the specific, business-like series of sounds that means it's found its cue and it's getting to work. And then it started printing, page after page after page. I frowned. I hadn't sent a multi-page document. I'd sent one label. I reached for the first page that came out, and the words on it didn't register immediately. My brain kept trying to reframe them as something work-related, something innocuous, and then they settled into meaning, and I felt the heat rising in my neck and my vision went blurry with rage. Residential lease agreement, property address, luxury downtown apartment complex, unit 14B, lease term, 12 months, commencing May 1st. I picked up the next page, and the next. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me, because the rest of my body felt like it was vibrating at a frequency just below audible. The printer kept going. 15 pages total. I read all of them. The tenant listed as primary was Marcus. His full legal name, his social security number, which I recognized because I'd filed our joint taxes, his employer, his income. All of it, neat and official and notarized, on a lease for a luxury downtown apartment that my husband had apparently signed without ever mentioning it to me. And then I got to page 4, the co-tenant section. Wait. I need you to really sit with what I'm about to tell you, because this is where the floor dropped out from under me. The co-tenant listed on that lease was a woman named Jade, 24 years old. I knew who she was. Marcus had mentioned her before, in the casual, offhand way you mention a coworker, the way that's specifically calibrated to register as unimportant. Jade from the office is handling the Callaway account. Jade put together that presentation. Jade, you know, from my team. Jade from his team. Jade who was 24 years old. Jade who was, according to page 4 of this document, about to share a luxury downtown apartment with my husband starting May 1st. May 1st was 3 weeks away. I set the pages down on the desk very carefully, the way you set down something fragile, even though the fragile thing was actually me. I looked at the crumpled piece of paper I'd pulled from the roller. I picked it up and smoothed it against the desk with the flat of my hand. It was page 7 of the lease, the financial disclosure section, and there, in a column marked source of deposit funds, someone, Marcus, in his handwriting I'd recognize anywhere, had written, annual performance bonus, Q1. Our annual performance bonus, the one Marcus had mentioned 2 months ago, rubbing his hands together, saying, it's a good one this year, babe. I'm going to put most of it in savings. The one I'd said, oh, that's great, we could use the cushion. The one I had completely stopped thinking about because I trusted him. He hadn't put it in savings. He had used it to rent his girlfriend an apartment. I stood in that office for a long time. Biscuit came and found me, dogs always know, and pressed himself against my legs, and I reached down and held his collar without thinking about it, just needing something solid in my hand. Then I opened the desk drawer and found the red Sharpie. Now, I want to be honest with you about my mental state in this moment, because I think it's important. I was not calm. I was not cool. I was operating on some frequency beyond emotion, past anger, past devastation, somewhere in the territory of pure, crystalline clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when your body realizes the situation is too serious for feelings and temporarily suspends them in favor of function. I turned to page 12, the guarantor section. It was blank. Marcus hadn't filled in a guarantor, which meant either the complex hadn't required one or he hadn't gotten that far yet. I picked up the red Sharpie. I pressed its tip to the guarantor signature line, and in my neatest, most deliberate handwriting, the handwriting I use for client contracts, for legal documents, for things that matter, I signed my full name, Ashlyn, last name, date, April 10th. I took a photo of page 12 with my phone. Then I took photos of every other relevant page, the tenant section, the co-tenant section, the financial disclosure, the property address. Then I opened my text messages. I texted Marcus first. I sent him the photo of page 12, my signature on his lease, and typed, looks like the printer works fine. Enjoy your new apartment, because I'm changing the locks on this one. Then I did something that, in retrospect, I understand will be divisive. I am prepared to be judged for it. Marcus's parents, his father is a deacon at their church, his mother runs the women's ministry, have been in my phone as Mom and Dad H since our our wedding. They are wonderful people. They are also people whose entire worldview is built on the bedrock of fidelity, commitment, and the sanctity of marriage. Marcus adores them. He has spent his entire adult life trying to be the man they believe he is. I forwarded the photos to Mom and Dad. Same caption, word for word. Then, because I believe in thoroughness, I found Jade's number in Marcus's work directory, which he'd stored in our shared contacts app because we share a family plan, and apparently he never considered that I might one day look. I sent her the same photos, just the photos, no caption. I felt she deserved to see, without comment, exactly what kind of man she'd decided to build a life with. Then I put my phone face down on the desk. Then I called a locksmith. Marcus called me back 47 seconds after I sent the first text. I know it was 47 seconds because I was watching the clock on the microwave when my phone lit up. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring again. The third time, I picked up. His voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him, not angry, not defensive, but scraped clean of everything, like a wire stripped of its insulation, raw and buzzing. Ashlyn, listen to me. I'm listening, I said, and I meant it. I was very, very still. What you found, it's not what you think it is. The heat came back into my neck. Marcus, I said quietly, I have a 12-month lease with your name and Jade's name and your bonus money on it. Please don't tell me what I think. I was going to tell you, he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word. I was going to tell you everything. I just needed to. I had to figure out the right way to. How long? I asked. Silence. How long, Marcus? 14 months. 14 months. I had met Jade at his company holiday party 14 months ago. She'd shaken my hand and said, Marcus talks about you all the time. And I had smiled and said something like, all good things, I hope. And she had laughed, and Marcus had laughed, and I had laughed, and we had all stood there together laughing. I want you out of this house before I get home from wherever I'm going, I said. My voice was so level it didn't even sound like mine. I've already called a locksmith. Ashlyn, please, can we just talk? We are talking, I said. This is the conversation. This is all the conversation there is. I hung up. His mother called me 20 minutes later. I almost didn't answer. I hadn't expected that to happen so fast, and I suddenly felt a spike of something that wasn't quite guilt but was adjacent to it. I'd blown up something bigger than just Marcus's secret. I'd blown up their image of their son, and regardless of everything, that gave me pause. But I answered, Ashlyn. Her voice was very quiet and very careful, the way it gets when she's holding herself together by will. Is this real? Yes, ma'am, I said. A long silence. Then, baby, I am so sorry. Her voice broke on the last word, and something in my chest cracked open. Not for Marcus, not for the marriage, but for her, for this woman who had welcomed me into her family, who had called me her daughter, who was now sitting somewhere with her phone in her hand learning that her son was not the man she'd raised him to be. You did not deserve this. You hear me? You did not deserve this. I had to set the phone down for a second after that. I pressed my back against the kitchen wall and stared at the ceiling and breathed. Biscuit put his head in my lap. Here is what happened in the hours after that, in rough chronological order, because I want you to have the full picture. Marcus came home at 4:15. The locksmith had already been and gone. He stood on the front porch and knocked on his own front door, which would have been almost funny in different circumstances, and when I opened it, he looked like a man who had aged a decade since breakfast. Can I get some of my things? He asked. I stepped back and let him in. I sat at the kitchen table while he moved through the house gathering items, laptop, charger, some clothes, his good watch, his medication from the bathroom cabinet. He was in and out in 22 minutes. Neither of us said anything. At the door, he paused. He turned back to look at me with an expression I couldn't quite name, not remorse exactly, not guilt exactly, something complicated and private that I realized I no longer had any obligation to understand. For what it's worth, he said, I never stopped caring about you. I looked at him for a long moment. You signed a lease, I said, with her bonus money, 3 weeks from move-in. That's not caring, Marcus. That's just logistics. He left. I've been sitting with all of this for the past 36 hours, and I want to be honest, I don't feel triumphant. That's not the right word. I don't feel vindicated in the way people seem to expect, the way the comments on my post keep suggesting, all those fire emojis and queen behavior, and he deserved every bit of it. Because what I actually feel is this enormous, exhausting grief for a version of my life that apparently never existed. For 6 years of Sundays and omelettes and shared tax returns and biscuit and plants that got watered and a person I thought I knew, who was, the whole time, someone else entirely. The red Sharpie signature was impulsive. life. I know that. My lawyer is already on the phone with the apartment complex to clarify that I am not actually a guarantor on any lease, and that no one should take that signature seriously, and that the whole thing was emotionally charged and legally meaningless. She used the phrase, clear emotional distress, twice in the same sentence, which told me she'd heard this kind of story before. But here's the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I turn over and over in my head at 3 in the morning when Biscuit is warm against my feet and the house is too quiet. He brought it home. He tried to print it on our home printer. He wrote his bonus money, our money, the money we'd talked about together, in the financial disclosure column of a lease he never planned to show me. He had a whole parallel life, and he managed it so carelessly that a jammed piece of paper and a printer tray was enough to dismantle it in an afternoon. What does it say about someone, that they can love you, or claim to love you, and simultaneously build an exit ramp this sloppy, this casual? Like the secret apartment was always going to be someone else's problem to discover. Like I was never going to look in the tray. I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it before you answer in the comments. Was I wrong to send those texts? Was I wrong to involve his parents, to let two people who loved their son unconditionally watch that image shatter? Or did Marcus forfeit the right to control his own narrative the moment he spent our money on someone else's rent, and left the paper trail in our printer? Because here's what I know, I'm not the one who made the mess. I just stopped pretending it wasn't there. Tell me where you stand.
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.